I walked through my own front door after 11 days away, and the first thing I noticed was that someone had moved my ceramic rooster off the entryway shelf. That sounds like a small thing. I know it does. But I'd had that rooster for 31 years. My mother gave it to me the Christmas before she passed, and I kept it in the exact same spot, facing the door, so I'd see it every time I came home. My husband used to tease me about it. He said I loved that ugly bird more than I loved him. Maybe he was right. Maybe that's why he moved it. I'd been in Portland visiting my sister. My real sister, not the one who mattered in all of this, because she'd had a knee replacement and needed help for the first week and a half. 11 days of sleeping on a pull-out sofa, making her soft-boiled eggs every morning, driving her to physical therapy, watching her learn to walk again. I didn't mind. That's what family does. I came back on a Thursday afternoon, my flight landing just after 2. I was tired in that particular way you get when you've been taking care of someone else for too long. Not resentful, just hollowed out. I wanted a hot shower, a glass of iced tea, and my own bed. I didn't get any of those things. When I pushed open the front door, my door, to my house, the house I'd bought with my own money 17 years ago before I ever met my husband. 4 people were sitting in my living room. My husband, my daughter-in-law, my youngest son, and my husband's sister, a woman I had never once in 22 years of marriage been able to trust, though I'd spent most of those years trying to talk myself out of that feeling. Nobody stood up. Nobody said, "Welcome home," or "How was your flight?" My youngest son, 26 years old, the one I had put through 2 years of community college and co-signed a car loan for just 18 months earlier, looked at the carpet when I walked in. My husband cleared his throat. "We've been waiting for you," he said. "We need to talk." I set my suitcase down by the door. I looked at each of them. My daughter-in-law had her hands folded in her lap like she was at a business meeting. My husband's sister was studying something on her phone. My son was still looking at the carpet. "Okay," I said, "talk." My husband was the one who spoke. He said he and his sister had been doing a lot of thinking. He said the business, our business, the landscaping and property maintenance company I had started from scratch 24 years ago with 4 clients, a borrowed truck, and a business plan I wrote on a legal pad at my kitchen table, needed to go in a new direction. He said his sister had connections I didn't have. He said she understood the market better. He said things had been stagnant. He said it was time for me to step back. I stood there in my own entryway with my carry-on bag at my feet and my dead mother's ceramic rooster missing from its shelf, and I listened to my husband explain to me that the company I had built from nothing should now belong to his sister. I asked him to repeat it. Not because I hadn't heard. I just needed to make sure he was actually saying what I thought he was saying. He repeated it, almost word for word. He'd clearly rehearsed. Then my son looked up from the carpet, and he said, "And I will never forget this as long as I live," he said, "Mom, you've done a great job, but it's time to let people who are better at this take over. We're trying to do what's best for the family." "We." My son said we. My daughter-in-law nodded. Like, this was reasonable. Like, I was being asked to hand over a book club membership and not the business I had spent more than 2 decades building. My husband's sister still didn't look up from her phone. I didn't cry. I want you to know that. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw anything. I just said very quietly, "I need to think about this." And I picked up my suitcase and I walked upstairs to my bedroom and I shut the door. Let me tell you something about myself. I grew up the second of 5 kids in a household where money was always tight. And dignity was the one thing my parents refused to let us lose. My father worked 2 jobs for most of my childhood. My mother sewed Halloween costumes for the neighbors' kids to make extra money at the end of October. They didn't talk about struggle the way people talk about it now, like it's something to perform. They just did what needed doing, and they passed that down to me. When I was 31 years old and my first marriage was falling apart, and I had 2 boys under 5 and about $400 in a savings account, I didn't ask anyone to rescue me. I got my pesticide applicator license. I took a class at the county extension office on commercial lawn care. I knocked on doors in the nice neighborhoods on the east side of town and I said, I can make your yard look better than it ever has, and I'll charge you less than whoever you're using now. I meant it and I proved it, and those 4 clients became 12, became 40, became 100. And now, 24 years later, Heron Creek Property Services has 41 employees and contracts with 7 commercial property management companies in 3 counties. I built that. Every invoice, every contract, every piece of equipment, every hire, me. My husband came into the business 8 years into our marriage. After his sales job ended, I gave him the operations manager role because I trusted him and because I thought it would be good for us, working together. His sister came in 3 years after that, doing sales. She was not bad at it, I'll give her that. But the company was mine. Legally, structurally, foundationally, mine. What my husband didn't know, and what his sister certainly didn't know, was that I had spent the better part of the last 14 months making sure it would stay that way. I want to back up. I need to explain something. About a year and a half ago, I started noticing things. Small things at first. A vendor payment that didn't match what was in the system. A fuel expense that was $300 more than it should have been. My husband brushing off my questions with, I'll look into it, and then never looking into it. His sister suddenly driving a different car. A lunch receipt for a restaurant in the city that I didn't recognize charged to a company card with no client name attached. I'm 63 years old. I've been running a business for 24 years. I know what the numbers are supposed to look like. I didn't say anything. I went to my accountant, a woman I've worked with for 11 years, and I told her what I was seeing. She pulled the books. She was quiet for a long time after she finished. Then she looked at me over the top of her glasses and she said, Catherine, I think you need to talk to a business attorney before you say a word to anyone. So I did. His name was not important. What was important was what he told me. He reviewed the company's founding documents, the operating agreement, everything. And then he told me something I already knew but needed to hear from a professional. As the sole original member of the LLC, with controlling interest never formally transferred, I had rights that my husband and his sister had apparently forgotten existed. More importantly, he told me about something I had written into the original operating agreement 24 years ago, almost by accident, because a lawyer I'd used back then had suggested it, and I hadn't thought much about it at the time. It was called a reversion clause, buried in Section 9 of the original operating agreement. In plain language, it said that in the event of any attempt to remove the founding member from operational control without documented board consent, which didn't exist, because there was no board, because I had never set one up, all secondary member rights would revert to the founding member automatically. All of them. My attorney looked at me. I looked at my attorney. He said, This is either the most fortuitous boilerplate clause I've ever seen, or whoever drafted this original agreement was very, very good. I said, She was. That clause wasn't my weapon yet, but I knew it was there. I also did 2 other things over the next few months. First, I quietly moved the primary banking relationship for Heron Creek to a new account that only I had signature authority over, under the pretense of a routine security upgrade. My accountant handled it. We sent a memo. Nobody asked questions. Second, I began backing up every financial record, every contract, every email chain, every internal communication onto a private encrypted drive that I kept at my accountant's office. All of this was legal. All of it was mine to do. I was the founding member and the controlling authority of my own company. I just made sure everything was in place before anyone decided to try to take it. By the time I walked through my front door that Thursday afternoon and found my husband and his sister and my son and my daughter-in-law sitting in my living room, like they were the ones who lived there, I had been ready for 7 months. I spent 2 nights in a hotel. I needed to think without being in that house, and I wasn't ready to have any conversation until I knew exactly what I was going to say. I checked into a courtyard about 12 minutes from home. I ordered room service the first night, a club sandwich and a bowl of soup, and I sat on the bed and I called my oldest son. He's 34. He lives in Denver with his wife and my 2 grandchildren. He had nothing to do with the business and had stayed out of it deliberately, which I had always respected. When I told him what had happened, what his brother had said, what his father had planned, there was a long silence. Then he said, "Mom, what do you need from me?" "That's the difference between my 2 boys. That's just the truth of it," I said. "Right now, I just need you to know. But I may need you as a witness to some things later." He said he understood. On the second night, I called my attorney. I told him the conversation had happened. He said, "Then we proceed." He had already prepared the documentation. All it needed was my signature. What that documentation did was trigger the reversion clause in Section 9. In simple terms, it formally notified all secondary members that their operational rights had reverted to the founding member effective immediately, pending no board vote having been called, documented, or conducted. It was sent by certified mail to my husband's address of record, his sister's address of record, and filed with the state. My husband's cell phone started ringing at approximately 9:15 on a Monday morning. I know this because my attorney told me later that the certified mail arrived that morning. I also know it because, at 9:22, I received the first of what would eventually be 47 missed calls over the following 3 days. My husband, his sister, my son, my daughter-in-law, my husband's mother, who I hadn't spoken to in 2 years. I didn't answer any of them. I had moved into my oldest son's old bedroom at my accountant's house. She offered, and I accepted, and I am still grateful for that, and I was letting my attorney handle every communication. Here is what happened while I wasn't answering my phone. My attorney sent a second document. This one was a formal audit request, citing my authority as sole founding member, covering the previous 36 months of financial records. When my accountant and the auditor she brought in went through those records, they found what I had suspected for over a year. My husband's sister had been invoicing 2 of our commercial clients through a separate LLC she'd set up. I'll call it what it was, a ghost company, and diverting payments that should have come to Heron Creek. The total over 18 months was just under $240,000. My husband knew. The paper trail made that clear. My youngest son did not know. I want to be fair about that. When the auditor's findings went to the attorney and the attorney contacted all parties, my son called my attorney's office directly and asked if he could speak to me. My attorney relayed the message. I took 2 days to think about it. Then I said yes. He came to the coffee shop I chose. He sat down across from me and he looked like he hadn't slept, which he probably hadn't. He said he was sorry. He said he'd been told that I was planning to retire anyway and that this was all agreed upon. He said he didn't know it wasn't true. I looked at my youngest son, the one I had rocked to sleep for the first 3 years of his life because he had colic and couldn't settle, the one I had driven to baseball practice 4 times a week for 6 years, the one I had sat up with in the ER twice before he was 10, and I made myself be honest. I said, "I believe that you believed what you were told, but you sat in that room in my house and you told me it was time to let other people take over. You didn't ask me, you didn't call me. You didn't say, 'Mom, is this true?' You just showed up and played a role in something without knowing if it was real." He didn't argue with me. He just said, "I know." I told him I needed time. I told him I wasn't done with him, but I wasn't ready yet. He nodded and left the coffee shop. I sat there for a while with my second cup of coffee and watched the traffic go by on the street and felt something settle in my chest. Not peace, exactly. Not yet, but something close to solid ground. The matter of my husband and his sister went to civil litigation. The $240,000 in diverted funds formed the basis of a civil fraud claim. The documentation was clean, the paper trail was airtight, and my attorney told me that the opposing counsel had called within 2 weeks asking to discuss settlement. My husband wanted to meet. To talk. He left a voicemail, one I actually listened to, though I didn't return it, where he said that things had gotten out of hand and he was sure we could come to an arrangement that worked for everyone. I had my attorney respond. The response said, in professional language, that there was no arrangement being considered and that any further direct communication attempts to me would be documented and included in the civil proceedings. He didn't call again. The divorce was not complicated, legally speaking. We had a prenuptial agreement, something he had signed without much pushback 22 years ago, back when Heron Creek was already 10 years old and already successful, back when he understood, or seemed to understand, that it was mine. The prenup made clear that the business and its assets were my separate property. What we split was the house, which we sold, and I took my half, and the joint retirement account, which was divided per the standard formula. I was not generous in the settlement. I want to be clear about that. I am a fair person, but fairness is not the same as charity, and what he had done did not earn him charity. His sister settled the civil claim 9 months later. As part of the settlement, she paid back $190,000, and the terms included a confidentiality clause and a formal acknowledgement, something my attorney had insisted on, that the funds had been improperly diverted. She did not admit fraud in those words because her attorney wouldn't allow it, but what she signed said enough. My husband received his share of the settlement from her, which covered what he owed in the divorce proceedings. It was tidy, in the end, the way things sometimes are when the paperwork is right. I want to tell you about the house before I finish. The ceramic rooster was still there when I went back to collect my things. Someone had put it in the kitchen, on the counter next to the coffee maker, which tells me my husband had moved it at some point, and then didn't know what to do with it when everything started to unravel. I wrapped it in a dish towel and put it in a box myself. I didn't trust anyone else to handle it. I live in a different house now, smaller, quieter, about 4 miles from my accountant's office and 6 miles from Heron Creek's main yard. There's a front porch with room for 2 rocking chairs, which I like, even though right now there's only one person sitting in them. The rooster is on the entryway shelf, same spot, facing the door. Heron Creek Property Services still has 41 employees. We picked up 2 new commercial contracts in the quarter after everything settled, because when you remove the people who are draining the resources, it turns out there's money for things like competitive bids. My operations manager now is a woman named, well, she's been with me for 9 years, and she is the sharpest person in any room she walks into. She deserved the title 2 years ago. I should have given it to sue her sooner. My oldest son flew in from Denver for a week after the dust settled. He helped me move into the new house. He put together the bookshelves in the living room, and he made spaghetti the first night, and we sat on the porch after dinner and talked for a long time about nothing in particular. His kids sent me drawings in the mail the week after, which I have on my refrigerator. My youngest son and I have spoken 3 times since the coffee shop. It is slow. It is careful. I don't know yet what it will become. But he showed up for my birthday in March. Just knocked on the door with flowers, didn't ask to come in, just said, "Happy birthday, Mom." And I thought about what my mother used to say when things were broken but not necessarily beyond repair. She'd say, "You can't rush a weld. You just have to hold the pieces steady and give it heat and time." I'm holding the pieces steady. The people who did this to me counted on something. They counted on the fact that I was tired and getting older and maybe didn't have the fight left in me that I once did. They counted on the fact that I loved them, or had loved them, and that love sometimes makes people hand over things they should protect. They counted on the fact that a woman past 60 might just accept what she was told and step aside quietly and let someone else take what she had spent her life building. They miscalculated, on every single count. I have worked for 40 years. I have built something real from nothing. I have raised 2 sons largely on my own, run a payroll, signed contracts, made hard calls, and done it all without asking anyone to carry me. I did not get to this point in my life by being easy to move. And I will tell you something I believe with every part of me, something I learned not from a book or a podcast or a quote on the internet, but from 31 years of running my own life on my own terms. The most dangerous thing you can do to a woman who has built everything herself is to assume she has nothing left to fight with. She Does, she always does. She's just been quiet about where she keeps it.